what ought to be recognized is that African countries are going through a very difficult situation. And whenever you see IMF and World Bank coming into your country, you should be very worried as an ordinary African, because they are not interested in the welfare of your country. We saw these with structural adjustment systems in the 1980s. Privatize, tax, reduce devalue your currency. Their prescriptions are known. Whether you are suffering from malaria or cancer, the medicine is the same. It is the duty of the administration in power, therefore, to ask the people to tighten their belts. But something is happening in Africa which must not be ignored. We have young populations which want jobs. They want opportunities. They want internet. And they are impatient. If you do not take care of their impatience, then they can run riot. And if you doubted me, look at what they did in Antananarivo in Madagascar. Every person joining politics must therefore be in a position to boldly tell the electorate, I'm going to do my best, but I'm not going to promise to bring heaven on earth. All of us will work together, hands on deck, to change our country. Let them vote you or deny you votes.
Finally, Professor, I mean, Africa is one that we would want to support to go democracy, but like you've said, in its own cultured manner. And coups rocked most parts of Africa, West Africa, especially, one does not support that. Now, coups and military rules, especially in West Africa, Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré has been making all these headlines, writing to the Pope, being, invited to Russia. Others see him as Africa's new poster child of the new economic revolution. He argues that juntas are necessary because civilians have failed to govern. What's your take on what's happening with Traoré? He's now also trying to have a bite at the constitution. Is he going to stick to what he promised as a transitional leader?
This is not the first time that Africa has seen military leaders coming in as messiahs. We have had them. We had them in Silvanus Olympia 1963 overthrown. We had them when Nkrumah was overthrown in 1966, 1967, when Nnamdi Azikiwe and Boubacar Tafawa Balewa were overthrown in Nigeria. We had them in Idi Amin in 1971. The reason why people have appetite for this kind of change, as we have seen in the Sahel, it started with Guinea, Dumbuya. Then it went to Niger, Achiani. Then it went to Atimi Goita in Mali. Then it went to Touré in Burkina Faso. And we also saw it in Gabon. And people celebrated because civilian administrations have failed to deliver. And in those countries, they were doing the bidding of France. But military juntas should be, as Nkrumah once said, if they are necessary, should be stopgap. Because leadership that does not emanate from national consensus is always under threat, internally and externally. So the things may be happening, but I am inclined to believe that the best way is for military leaders who come in for a short time to be midwives towards a more sustainable, institutionalized form of leadership.
Do you see this happening in Burkina Faso? Because even as things stand, not entirely that Traoré and his military, grouping are totally in control of Ouagadougou and the other parts in N'Djamena.
In fact, what has happened, not only in Burkina, even in Guinea, they have extended power. And we have seen in Gabon, the military ruler has now been elected as the president. In Guinea, Dumbuya is going to contest and he'll win the presidency. And in Mali, they have already extended the term of the junta. In Burkina, they have already extended the term of the junta for 5 years. And when you do that, then you are creating an environment which necessitates that others will try to remove you. So my own view is, it is an opportunity for these well-meaning people who have taken power through the barrel of the gun to use it for purposes of creating an enabling environment where power must be re-examined so that when there is a new dispensation, it is a different way of governance. I pray and hope that that will happen. A delegation that I ought to have been with only 2 weeks ago was in Ouagadougou, and these are some of the things that they discussed. I hope and pray that I'll be in Ouagadougou in the month of February next year. And if I'm given the opportunity, my view is let us use this opportunity creatively to create a new dispensation for the sake of Africa, so that you are a good example of what is achievable. Because a little country like Burkina Faso or Mali or Niger or Guinea or Gabon cannot exist in spite of the rest of Africa.
Hello everyone, brothers and sisters. ECOWAS has faced another challenge after military leaders in Guinea-Bissau took power. What you see here, these are military leaders who took power in Guinea-Bissau and arrested the president of that country, Mr. Umaro Embaló. So, brothers and sisters, the question is, will ECOWAS invite Guinea-Bissau militarily? What will ECOWAS do? Because when Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso military leaders took power, you remember what happened. They sanctioned these countries. They tried to invade Niger militarily, but they didn't do so. And 2 years later, today we are talking about another military coup in the same region, in the country of Guinea-Bissau. What is happening within ECOWAS? I've been saying this many times. We have ECOWAS as a regional body and, of course, African Union as continental bodies. What are these bodies doing to make sure that leaders who are running those countries have to serve the interests of the people? Because, you know, when you see leaders, military leaders took power, it means political leaders have failed. For many times, our political leaders are not serving the interest of majorities. Many of our political leaders, political figures, are being used to loot their nation by the Western power. Of course, even those who are in military, sometimes they're being used. For instance, we have seen what has happened in Gabon. But majority political leaders have failed to deliver what the people want. And that's why you see it's very easy for military leaders to take power. And the good thing that in this successful military coup in Guinea-Bissau, there's no bloodshed. What they did is to arrest the president and announcing on national television that from now onward, the country is under control of the military. So what ECOWAS is going to do? Have been listening and watching a professor talking about democracy and the governance system. Let me share what professor has spoken about these issues. Maybe you can understand.
Many leaders held the view. Whether they were mistaken or not is another debate for another day. But they held the view that one of the things that they had to do was to have single-party states, so that if you went to Zaire then, or Congo before it became Zaire, or Zambia, or Malawi, or Kenya, or Uganda, or Tanzania, everybody believed that in order to hold the many nationalities together, you needed a single party under whose aegis organization of state affairs would be undertaken. Mistakes were made. And then the conceptual West convinced us that our salvation could only come from something they call democracy. And I'm using the word very deliberately, something they call democracy, which they defined. And they defined it in English, if you are colonized by the English, and they defined it in French if you are colonized by the French, and they defined it in Portuguese if you are colonized by the Portuguese, and they defined it in Spanish if you are colonized by the Spaniard. We never defined it in Kinyarwanda. No. It was never defined in Igbo or Yoruba. And we were told after the collapse of the Soviet Union that democracy was equals to 1, multi-party politics, 2, periodic elections, 3, limitation of terms of the presidency. That is how the conceptual West defined it for us. And we who have had the advantage, if it is an advantage at all, of being educated in the West, there is a sense in which our thought processes are also confined by those definitions. However much we want to free ourselves, we find our default mode being how we were trained. So when we define democracy, we are also caught up in this box. Sometimes we tell ourselves to think outside of the box, but the true north of our thought processes still remains the box. We never think without the box.
Sisters, that is Professor PLO Lumumba. I'm sharing this for you to understand what happened this week in Guinea-Bissau after the military leader took power and arrested the President Umaro Embaló. Have been saying this many times that Africans, we need to redefine our governance system. If we don't come up with our governance systems, if we continue with these Western systems, we are going nowhere. We are going nowhere, brothers and sisters, because the Western system put in place after colonialism. During colonialism, the West or the Europeans looted Africa, controlled Africa. So after African countries regaining independence, the European didn't want to leave totally. What they did is to train some Africans, educated them. Of course, at that time, we thought it is a good thing, it's a good idea, Africans being educated, but within our educated people, they planted some Africans and created them as leaders. Of course, we know some of them were good leaders and still others has good leaders, but behind the scene, there's some also leaders who are working for the interest of the West. So they came with the idea of democracy, and they told us, as the professor said, democracy means elections, periodic elections. Democracy means multipartism, and through multipartism, they created something called political parties. And those political parties are being sponsored by those who want to control Africa. And they use general elections or these periodic elections to place people whom they want. You see, they created something called democracy. We accepted. It's a good thing. We are going to choose our own leaders. Then they went far and they create multipartism, that for you to have to be democratic, you need to have multipartism. Multipartism, it means you're going to have several political parties. So in political parties, they support parties that they want for them to put into the power. So they use the same faces, black people like me, to serve their own interest. And they use political parties to put those people, to put puppets into power. What we see today in Sahel, of course, in West Africa, Madagascar, it is not by accidentally. This is a new version of independence. Africans are seeking independence. So, have been saying democracy is good, but in the other end, it's a scam. And I wish to have a session where we'll bring African leaders and being lectured by Professor PLO Lumumba and other Pan-Africanists and telling these political leaders what the people of Africa want. People of Africa, they are not interested with elections. People of Africa want food on the table, want good laws. That's what the people of Africa want. They're not interested with someone who are, whether you are handsome or you are ugly, whatever. But if you serve the interest of majority, people will accept and will say you are a good leader. This continent has resources. People want to know how their resources are being used. So political leaders, what right now they are doing is to give these resources to other people. And they say we are inviting investors. How is it possible that we Africans we cannot be investors? It's only Chinese, it's only Europeans, Americans who are investors. I think we need to move out of those notion and those of thinking.
Thank you, Africa. Mama